I gave people all the stuff they really needed. Social Security checks, utility bills, TV guide.
I want a TV guidance counselor. TV guidance counselor. Staying up to watch all night, and everything's gonna be alright with my TV guidance counselor.
Hey everybody, welcome to TV Guidance Counselor. I am Ken Reed. I am your TV Guidance Counselor, just as I have been each and every day since February 14th, 2014, year 11 of the show. Still, there are amazing guests I am shocked that I haven't had on the show, and it is such a pleasure to speak with them. This week is no exception. My guest is Professor Eliot Borenstein, and Elliot is an author, a professor. You can go to eliotborenstein.net, where you can find all of his stuff. He has, I don't even know where to start. I first became aware of him when he wrote a book last year, or maybe 2 years ago, called Marvel in the 1970s, which if you are a comic book person, or even just a person who's kind of a nerd for narrative, or likes a really fun, interesting, not dry academic sort of examination of a pop culture phenomenon, which I imagine if you're listening to this show, you do. Check that out. He is also the world's leading expert on sort of Russian disinformation, sort of media, commercials, television, which is a side note I didn't even know when I read his book. He's written a bunch of stuff. Go to his website. Just go through there. Pick out his stuff. I mean, he's fascinating, fun, smart guy, obviously. And we discuss television here. So I love this episode, and it was an absolute pleasure to speak with him. I cannot thank him enough for taking time out of his schedule to sit down and speak with me. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Eliot Borenstein.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Elliot, how are you, sir?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
You're so welcome. I've talked about it on the show before, and I really loved the book you wrote about Marvel in the 1970s, which kind of does fit in here, because I think there's sort of a cultural, a weird cultural, like, crossroads.
Definitely.
At this time. And one of the things, and the other thing you have an expertise in, and which is totally sort of unrelated, is, like, Russian pop culture and, like, propaganda, right?
Yeah, that's my main thing, actually.
Which is so interesting to me, too. Like, just as a side note, like, you wrote a book on Pussy Riot and sort of the weird Cold War stuff we had on TV in the 80s. Like, I think Head of the Class was the first show to ever film in Russia, which is weird. That's a whole other conversation, but very interesting as well. But the thing that I really resonated with me the most in the Marvel book, and I think is relevant here, especially to this particular issue that you picked, is the sort of innovation in narrative that Marvel really excelled in, and I don't think really started getting credit for till very recently, and being ahead of things, where most of the sort of quality TV that's out now is kind of just using Marvel narrative techniques from the 1970s.
Well, that's a good point.
Which is, it makes sense. People grew up on it. But the issue you picked here, the cover is Mary Hartman. So this is June 19th to the 25th, 1976. And speaking of narrative innovation for 1976, I think that's a pretty great example.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of connecting what's going on in TV with what's going on in Marvel, the centerpiece for my book was Howard the Duck, which I think is just the most wonderfully quirky, innovative, curmudgeonly comic out there, and obviously satirical. And basically, it was the Mary Hartman of comics.
That's true.
There's a very similar sensibility. And people even complain in letter pages, like, what's going on with this comic? It's turning into Mary Hartman. I'm thinking, yes, that's right. Please, more. We'll talk about Mary Hartman, but I wanted to build on something you were saying about the 70s and narrative, because I do think there's so much in common with what's going on in Marvel in the 70s and on TV. Less in terms of how narratives evolve, because Marvel was doing serial storytelling long before that was really acceptable on television, because we didn't have VCRs, we didn't have any way. You couldn't guarantee that people could keep watching. That's why at that point I never watched Masterpiece Theater, because I just couldn't be. I was afraid I'd miss something that I'd lose. Whereas I could watch Three's Company and have no problem, except that it was Three's Company. But what you have here is, for me, the equivalent of what the best part of Marvel was doing on television was this amazing Norman Lear, Mary Tyler Moore axis that created this incredible TV that, on the one hand, sort of still holds up, but like the Marvel comics of the 70s, you have to kind of cut it some slack for being of its time, and you have to gloss it for people who don't really know it. And in a sense, it becomes something like a really good medieval text that you have to kind of explain. And the other thing about it, I really saw this when looking through this issue, which just, oh my God, everything about this issue, I really had no idea how much the tobacco industry was propping up.
Oh God, yes. Oh, yes.
For tobacco. But what really comes through when I flipping through and seeing the other programs, the ones that I would not watch, that you could not pay me to watch, and paying to watch is something I want to get to too, is because my mother was paid to watch television this time. How there's all this really good stuff surrounded by terrible, terrible crap. And I don't even mean trash, because trash is redeemable. Just like so badly made, so uninteresting, so awful, and kind of irredeemable, even as kitsch. And then in the middle of that, you have like Barney Miller, and you have Mary Hartman, and All in the Family, and MASH. In this vast wasteland, you had these really weird little oases that also happened to be popular. So it's a moment when you could see some people in television, like the people who trusted Norman Lear and the people surrounding the MTM productions, who were willing to trust some portion of the audience to be a little bit more sophisticated and cater to them. That would really pick up in the 1980s with Taxi and Cheers and St. Elsewhere and Hill Street Blues. But you had the beginning of that with these shows, which relied on their audience to do a little bit of work and to watch kind of sympathetically.
Yes, exactly to your point. They were rewarded sort of financially and with audience by giving the audience some kind of credit for not being complete idiots. Which was sort of against all conventional wisdom as far as sort of mass media at the time. Partly, probably, I think, because it was just this the sort of dream of the 50s, the future had kind of died, and everyone was a little bit more cynical and a little bit more aware. So it was kind of hard to really present people with a super glossy escapism, which came back hard about a decade later. But this was sort of a unique 10 years where it was like, we're not gonna fall for that flat out now. Like we want to see a family in Cabrini Green. We want to see, a tough paperwork riddled police station in Barney Miller,
Oh, absolutely. Just a couple years after this issue, which was in 1976, or maybe it was in the campaign. I don't know. I was awfully young. I was born in 66. Jimmy Carter, president from 76 to 80, referred to America as being in a malaise, which was a really unusual word to use. It's basically French. And he was derided for it, but it really kind of sums up a lot about the culture as this cultural hangover from the 1960s, when, after Watergate, and this is such a cliche, right? But when this kind of utopian optimism is just dashed, and you have the me decade in the sense that you're just basically in it for yourself, and the system is terrible. And so it is a time for I think productive exploration of cynicism. There could be nihilistic exploration of cynicism, but this is really, really productive.
Yes, and much like the Marvel comics of the 70s, which were generally comics written by the first generation of people who grew up reading comics, which is why we started to get that self-reflective and sort of evolution. This was the same scenario with television, where you had the first generation of people that grew up always having television are now making television. We start to see the effects of that in the stuff that they're making.
Absolutely. And in each case, it's both people raised on the medium, so it's native to them, but they also have other influences. They've read things.
Yes.
They've seen art movies. And so it's this wonderful hybrid of all of these different influences that the previous generation simply could not have had.
Yes. And a great point, too, that people had other influences. And, you know, I always mostly say this about directors and writers, but they lived a life before they got in the entertainment industry.
Seriously, yeah, let's hope.
Yeah, it wasn't like since age 4 I was, you know, doing acting and whatever. It was like, oh, they were in World War II and they were, you know, a battle photographer, and now they're writing for Love Boat. You know, it's like,
that's the next generation, like Joss Whedon being the son of a TV screenwriter, right?
Yes.
Son of a cobbler.
Yes, and we saw how that worked out.
Well, yes.
Yeah,
Well, for a while, but yes.
the cigarette ads, man. I always joke that, I mean, I'm not a smoker, never have been, but every issue there's at least 10 cigarette ads, and I don't think I've seen the same brand twice in any issue of TV Guide. And the angles, like this one, it's how I lost 1,200 milligrams of tar the first week without losing out on taste for Doral.
Yeah, yeah. These are incredible, and their ads are things. So there's all of the smoking ads, which are just, you know, wonderfully vintage. And then, I mean, especially if you think that people thought that TV was kind of harmful for you. Then you have the smoking ads. Then there's the Seagram's ad, basically a Father's Day Seagram's ad about like being like, I don't know, kids, buy Dad Seagrams. I'm not sure how that was supposed to work.
Help Dad drink away you.
Yes. Then there's the CB radio, which I actually remember us even having at one point. You know, no truckers would talk to us. And then this little tiny thing for vaginal and rectal itching, which surprised me. That was
yeah, that's Jimmy Carter's Malaise. That right
I
there.
guess, well, he did have hemorrhoids. He famously had hemorrhoids while in office, and it was reported on TV. So, so maybe this was for him, the poor guy.
So you grew up in Columbus, Ohio, you know, which probably feels a billion miles away from all this stuff. And to the CB radio point, like your touch points to the outside world are like television being pumped into your house, and CB radio, which for all intents and purposes to younger people is like an analog internet.
Yeah, a truck driver's internet.
Yes. I want the internet just truckers.
Truck driver. Or in our case, pretending to be a truck driver. So there's truck drivers and catfish truck drivers, right? It's pathetic. But yeah, so Columbus was is a fascinating phenomenon because it was the test market for the world. Like every fast food place came out of it. But in 76, when this is happening, so I'm 10 years old, we didn't have cable yet, and it wasn't a big enough market to have, like, Cleveland had Channel 43. My family's from Boston, so we'd go visit Boston, and there'd be all these other channels that had much better reruns and monster movies and stuff like that, which we eventually got with cable. But in the time period you're talking about, it is that moment that most people don't remember anymore, when all you had was 4 channels. CBS, ABC, NBC, and PBS. And if you were in a family like ours, and I think like most families, which just kept the TV on all the time, you ended up watching just crap that you hated, even before hate watching was a concept.
Yeah.
And so I'm just reminded of how little choice, like when I was trying to pick things like, oh, this is good from 8 to 8:30. What am I going to do from 8:39? I guess I'll watch this piece of crap until 9 o'clock comes on.
I wouldn't shut it off and not do that.
Yeah. And it was audio wallpaper in my house, which really got to bother me when I visit my parents when they were older. And I mentioned my mother. I think this is actually worth bringing in. So my father was a social worker. My mother had been a Hebrew teacher, which was not much of a gig. And also, I think this plays into it, she was morbidly obese. So being in front of kids, I think, actually got to be kind of unpleasant. Mm-hmm. And she had a beautiful phone voice. So she worked in market research for a company called Burke Market Research, which would call people and try to figure out what they remembered from TV commercials.
Oh, wow.
So she would, very often part of her job would be to, at home, with an audio tape record an episode while waiting for a particular commercial to come on, take notes on it so they'd be ready to ask questions about it, but the questions you'd ask were not supposed to be specific about the commercial, like everything you'd remember until you got to the commercial. So my mother would have to watch things she really hated, like The Waltons, Little House on the Prairie, and eventually, what was that horrible show with the rednecks on in their car?
Oh, Dukes of Hazzard.
Dukes of Hazzard, right? and the original Battlestar Galactica. All this stuff she'd have to watch, and I would sometimes watch with her. And sometimes they'd be desperate for someone my demographic, so they would fake it, because my mother would be she was Mrs. Burke. This is Mrs. Burke from Burke Marketing Research. Right. So she'd have someone call me to be the person responding with the commercial. But I knew the commercial, and I would torture them by giving them every detail about this commercial. Like, this kid is wearing a blue shirt, and he's really happy on his bicycle because he's thinking of all the residuals he's going to get for this commercial. They had to write this down by hand. So it was all this kind of mutual pranking and torturing that was going on. So the TV, I got to feel like TV was part of not just entertainment, but it was business, and it was people's lives in a completely different way, thanks to my mom's really kind of awful job.
And it's also making you hyper aware of, at an earlier age, so many kids, like, cynically, TV exists to give us commercials. The stuff that we watch is supposed to just be there, so we'll watch commercials. And the fact that anything good gets made is sort of like a miracle, and despite everything.
Right. And I was studying these commercials when it was going to be for me, but also that the commercials, which we're supposed to not pay attention to, actually functioned like internet memes do now, because we quoted them all the time. My husband, some hotshot, here's his ancient shiny secret cow gone. All these things that people of my age, I don't know how old you are, can quote to each other the way that we now quote internet memes or share internet memes.
Yeah, I'm slightly younger than you, but I have all those in my brain as well. I can't believe I ate the whole thing.
Right.
Like all of those weird phrases, which becomes, larger scale. Like, one of the things on the show that we always talk about, sort of those of us that grew up pre-millennium, is that it's this shared experience that we all had, I think for better, which, even though it's, a commercial product, like, it's kind of unifying to be able to all sing the Alka-Seltzer song. Whereas I don't think everything's sort of micro-audienced now. So, people don't have that overarching experience, even if it is commercials.
Yeah, I mean, what I was aware of, like, and what made us really look bad going over to the Soviet Union and to Russia is, like, for common experience, the Soviets had Dostoevsky and Pushkin and Tolstoy, and we had the Alka-Seltzer song.
Yes.
It really did not show us at our best.
I've seen so very little Soviet television, and you've seen Exporting Raymond, the documentary?
Oh, that was loads of fun. Yes.
Yeah,
that was post-Soviet, but yes.
Yes, that's like the sum total knowledge I have of that is that sort of post-Soviet, like them remaking U.S. sitcoms for a Russian audience.
Yeah. Well, the Soviets, at most, they had miniseries. There were very few things that continued on and on. So those became touchstones because they were shown again and again. But television was not this unifying narrative thing like it was for us, because they just didn't produce so much fictional content, and certainly not stuff that went on forever, so that when soap operas arrived, they just ate them up.
Right.
But initially, it was just that it was interesting because the miniseries in America takes off not long after 76. Like, how strange to have a story that has a beginning and an end, and that's all they had. It makes it sound like they're impoverished culture.
All they had was...
That is what they had.
Yeah.
Which meant you could actually watch the whole thing.
Yeah, it's sort of an evolution of film in that it's like, this is something you can really only do on TV. It's a movie you watch over 3 nights.
Yeah. I mean, but before Roots and Holocaust in the 70s, the two, like, big, especially Roots, really.
Yeah.
There was no sense that you could get people to go back every night and watch the continuation of something on television.
That was sort of the holy grail of television, too, like the multiple times in a week to come back. So Batman 66 tried it. They when it was a huge hit the first season, they're like, we're going to show the show twice a week. And it pretty much killed the show, like, immediately. Or you had stuff like in a lot of markets, they'd do the $1 Million Movie where they'd show the same movie every night at 8 for a whole week.
Well, right. My CBS affiliate, I think, was called Channel 10, and they had something called Big Ten Theater on Sunday, and we used to joke there was 10 movies because it was always Landing on the Ants and like 4 or 5, The King and I, again and again and again. So we watched them because for some reason we didn't turn off the damn TV.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was the thing. As soon as I got home from school, it just went on. I didn't even look at it.
I don't know how many episodes of The Love Boat I watched and never liked it.
Oh, no.
Ever liked it.
No.
But I know way too many episodes.
Oh, there's some in hindsight, that's a show that's not good and is so much fun to watch, kitsch value wise.
I guess I haven't tried it in decades.
Oh, there's some great. So my favorite thing about that, and especially as someone who enjoys the sort of disparate narratives, is it's like they made no attempt to mix like storylines. So they literally wrote them separately. So you'll have a really broad comedy through line, a very serious thing about like a Holocaust survivor, or like something that's really heavy, and then something just like super horny. And like it doesn't make, and they're cutting between these for an hour.
Yeah. And you could do that intentionally, right, to balance, but they're not.
No. Total blender, complete mess. Yeah, that show. So let's dive in here. On Saturday night, what jumped out for you?
Saturday night. Okay, I'm taking a look here. Right, so Saturday night, we have at 8 o'clock, The Jeffersons, which for me was never the best of the Norman Lear things, but I loved the whole phenomenon of the spin-offs. Like, I kept track of spin-off family trees, which was kind of like the MCU, you know? Because All in the Family begat the Jeffersons and begat Maude, which begat Good Times. And, you know, as a trivia thing, I love to think of all the different spin-offs of All in the Family because there's so many tiny ones that people forget because they were terrible or didn't work. So I would watch the Jeffersons, but I never loved the Jeffersons, but I was loyal enough. And also, once again, there's nothing else good on.
Yeah.
Because 8:30 comes around, I was like, oh crap, what am I going to watch here? So I guess I'd watch this pilot for something called Freeman, where ghosts haunt a colonial house starring Jimmy Bio.
Yes.
But I think that's the same channel. I just keep the channel on until 9 o'clock. Because 9 o'clock you've got Mary Tyler Moore. And to me, Mary Tyler Moore is still almost the platonic ideal of good situation comedy, character driven, right? And that and the Norman Lear stuff is where I think there is common territory between this television and the Marvel stuff that I'm talking about in my book, because one of the things I focus on in these comics is these comics that are really putting an emphasis on interiority, the inner lives of these people. And here you see it in terms of character development, but you really get to know these people as people, and they can seem real to you because in addition to having incredible dialogue and funny one-liners, they're very, very well developed. Even if from episode to episode there's almost virtually no serialized storytelling. So Mary Tyler Moore, I mean, everybody puts Chuckles the Clown, Death of Chuckles the Clown as number one for television, and you can really see why. It was just so beautifully done, even without having all of that Norman Lear emphasis on topicality. You really can't beat Mary Tyler Moore.
It holds up very well, as does Bob Newhart show. Those are like the two MTM shows of that era that I just think are like rock solid. Although personally, I do prefer 80s Newhart to the Bob Newhart show. But
I can see that. I see why. But I did love the Bob Newhart show with its wonderful understatement.
It's so funny. And it's because this is June, to reference it, there's unsold pilots on. Because at this time, they wouldn't lose money. If they commissioned a pilot, they're going to burn it off in the summer, and they're going to get some money's worth. So this one, that you pointed out, Freeman, about a ghost who haunts the new occupants of a colonial house. So this is basically the Ghost and Mrs. Muir with Scott Baio's little brother, Jimmy, in it. There's one earlier called Good Heavens where Sid Caesar plays a tailor with Carl Reiner, and it was an angel. Like none of these went.
Right, and these are very talented comedians from a different era, so that the likelihood that that feature centering them is going to work is sadly low.
Yeah.
I think about these two shows and how brilliant they are, and I remember showing my older son the Chuckles episode of Mary Tyler Moore, and he liked it. But where it gets to be this kind of medieval thing that has to be curated is like, and there's a laugh track.
Yeah.
And it's just so hard to watch the laugh track now. And, one of the shows that I'm going to watch during this week is One Day at a Time. And I remember when there was the reboot of One Day at a Time, I was like, this is great. But it had a laugh track, and I couldn't watch a 21st century show with a laugh track. And I hated the laugh track back even then, but we just accepted it as a... not even necessary evil, something they were just not going to give up. The only concession was not having the laugh track during the surgery scenes in MASH.
Right.
Otherwise, this is where the notion of having trust in your audience just completely goes.
It's that unique thing, too, that I think has been lost because the multicam sitcom has become the thing of like Disney Channel and Nickelodeon, where, it's looked at as sort of like a baby's format, and that's why you get the, the laugh track and that sort of thing. But that weird hybrid of TV's new, we're going to take what we know from radio and what we know from live theater, kind of mash it into something that's not like either, but still has some vestigial trappings of them. And then those are the weird things that carry on. And it is it's extra weird when they put laugh tracks on single cam shot on film shows.
Yes. And I also hadn't thought about what it means for the production from the point of view of the actors until I saw you can go online and you can watch clips of Friends without the laugh track. And what you see is these actors just have to pause for nothing. Right. And that, to me, that's even weirder than like playing against a green screen while, a dragon is there.
Hold a tennis ball.
Stopping. You're just stopping and waiting for this laughter that is not there, but will be put in. And it's really bizarre.
Oh, yeah. Hugely bizarre. I had Adam Resnick on, and Adam is Chris Elliott's writing partner, and they did Get a Life. And Fox made them have a laugh track on Get a Life.
Oh.
And they shot with no audience. And so Fox was just like, you have to have a laugh track. And they're like, as long as we have it, like we can do whatever we want with it. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. So they would put it in like inappropriate places or like not when there's anyone saying anything, like no, just bizarre. And in that regard, it kind of added this cool layer inadvertently, but man, it is distracting.
Did you watch Kevin Can Fuck Himself?
Yes.
That was a brilliant use of the laugh track because when it's doing the sitcom thing, they have the laugh track, and then when it's the modern kind of horror story of being married to this monster, no laugh track. That was really great.
Speaking of growing up in Boston, yeah, I had to like slowly watch that because it was almost like too real.
Yeah.
At times I was like, ooh.
Yeah. But I also like that there's an awareness. Okay, the laugh track is something in the toolbox that you can use. It's sort of like in comics how. Starting with things like Watchmen, the thought balloon became something just totally out of style. And then in the 2000s, at some point, Bendis decides to use the thought balloon a little bit in his Mighty Avengers comics as a way to do the kind of thing that Woody Allen did in Annie Hall, where you show what people are really thinking when they're talking. Like, okay, this is a tool that is cheesy, but maybe we can use it for something creative. And I think the laugh track was used that way in here, and Bendis did it in Mighty Avengers with the balloon. Yeah,
I feel like the previous use of the thought balloon was that Marvel method of, well, I don't know if they're going to draw this like I want it, and no one's going to narrate all their moves, so they'll think it.
Or Chris Claremont's like, part of me wants to do this, and part of it's torn, and it's like a song, and and Scott, I love you, and this great like outpouring of emotion that works in its way.
I do love also comics. Side note, and this I think I first really started noticing in 70s comics, and it kind of came out of vogue, is the cross-reference asterisk.
Yes. And also the thing in the 70s that Matt Fraction used in a really funny way in his Defenders series. I can't remember that wasn't Fearless. I can't remember what that one was called. Maybe it's just Defenders, where he had little things at the bottom of the page that were one-sentence advertisements for other Marvel comics.
Yes.
Because they always had that, and I loved them at the time, but they're really real distraction.
Also, other side note, because I have you here, my dream, and they'll never do this, but they should have done a Netflix MCU series, Ghost Rider, set in the 70s.
Right. Like they're going to do with the new Fantastic Four movie.
Yes, in that alternate 60s, but it wouldn't have messed up their timelines, it wouldn't have messed up anything, and you would have got that perfect, like, Evel Knievel kind of set. It just would have been so perfect.
Well, it would explain why you're bothering to do Ghost Rider.
Yes, that's true.
Probably it. Like, why would you come up with a flaming-headed skull demon on a
motorcycle
bike unless it was the 70s?
Right. Whose main bad guy is another guy whose head is a giant eyeball and looks like he's in The Residence.
The Orb. Yes.
Also,
yeah, I didn't know when I first saw The Residence, like, it's the Orb.
Yes, it's a whole orbs in suits. How weird. Then before we get to Sunday, there's an ad in here that I think I'm going to give this ad of the issue. Probably it's on page 21 of the PDF.
Okay.
It says authentic imported full-length embroidered Dahara kaftan.
Oh, yes.
And it's just this hideous full-length, kaftan. But it says, the most seductive garments for on the town or at-home swingers.
Yes. I wonder if they knew what they were saying when they said swingers.
I don't know if it's better or worse if they did or they didn't.
And also this full length thing that I don't associate that with swingers really. I mean, she's practically if we're covering her face, she's wearing a burqa.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is absolutely hilarious, and it's only $14.98.
Yeah, it's a special introductory direct import price. Yeah, I feel like this was a 65-year-old ad man writing this, be like, what are they like? On the town swingers.
Yeah. It's sort of like the way that Stan Lee would get youth culture completely wrong,
Yes.
right? Yeah. $8.98 just for the shirt. I wish we could find out how well this worked.
I'm sure there's your 6-part true crime documentary.
Yeah, but I mean, this is sort of like the equivalent of the ad for the sea monkeys in the comics, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I did try to get the sea monkeys, as everybody did, and they were disappointments. So maybe this caftan. I don't know how the caftan could be disappointment because the hopes must be very low.
Yeah, your view of the world would not allow for you to be disappointed by this if you order it.
But if the sea monkeys wore the caftans, that would be very impressive.
The world, we'd have no problems in the 21st century if that was the utopia we created.
So, before we go to Sunday,
Yes.
I want to say something. Like, I'd forgotten they only asked for 8 to 10, so I kept looking for what I was going to do at 10 o'clock. And this reminded me of what a wasteland 10 o'clock was for people who didn't like crappy action things.
Yeah.
It goes sometimes like, 10 o'clock, I don't know what I'm doing at 10 o'clock. I mean, there's some Monty Python coming up and there's Night Gallery episodes. But 10 o'clock, which is the best time, and later areas, it's just sad.
Yeah, it's a real wasteland.
Yeah.
And it's like they knew people were done with primetime and they're not going to come back till the late night show. So they're like, it doesn't matter.
And this is like going to Sunday, what all of Sunday was like, right? Because I remember getting before you get to primetime, it barely matters. So we'd be watching TV. We always watch the news, of course. But then ultimately, we had a choice between Hee Haw, Lawrence Welk, or Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And that was a tough choice, right? Because none of us were interested in nature. Hee Haw was terrible, though. As a really little kid, I just liked the donkey's mouth opening up. And Lawrence Welk, oh my God. Yeah. But we watched one of them. We always watched one of them.
Hee Haw drove me insane. As someone, I had this visceral aversion to Southern shows. Mama's Family, Hee Haw, they would come on and I would get physically something about it was just so unappealing.
Yeah, well, Hee Haw was sort of designed to be unappealing. But the interesting thing about Hee Haw was it was the most successful version of Laugh-In, basically. But starring Hicks. And Jimmy Carter's no good younger brother was on Hee Haw at some point during his presidency.
Oh, that's right. That makes perfect sense. I think Hee Haw was still around during Clinton, but I feel like Roger Clinton was probably on. I think it's still on.
No. Oh, you have to look this up for this episode.
They constantly do new versions of it, and the Nashville network would have it. Sometimes it was regional, but it kind of hasn't gone away in some format.
We need a sort of a dark Netflix reboot of Hee Haw.
Yes.
As a kind of True Detective thing.
Yes. What are these people doing?
Exactly. Where are they? What are they? Pod people? What is their plan?
Yes.
Really?
It's sort of like Westworld.
Yeah, or they're worshiping Cthulhu.
Yes.
Yeah,
the corn. It's the corn.
It's the corn.
One thing too. There's a little box promoting next week's issue of TV Guide in the Sunday night, and it says Mary in Moscow. Next week, TV Guide reports in words and pictures on Mary Tyler Moore's mission to Moscow.
Which was my second choice for this because I thought, oh my God, but I have no memory of Mary Tyler Moore going to Moscow. And I can't, it certainly wasn't for her show. No. I can't even imagine. But it must have been hilarious in its way.
Yes, so bizarre. Then you get Sonny and Cher, which I
watched as a kid. And so that's this other phenomenon from the 70s that really died mostly, which is the variety show. And so my parents being older, since they're my parents, they enjoyed variety shows more. By the way, on Soviet television, variety was everything.
Of course.
And I liked Carol Burnett. But it was always like this, now they're going to sing some terrible song, right? But on Sonny and Cher, at least, there was some music I kind of liked, but it was really bad sketch comedy.
Awful. William Conrad falling down
Yeah. But this somehow managed to survive for quite a while, and there's just so much of that. But I probably would have watched it was between Sonny and Cher or Nova, which makes me sound like I'm trying to be really highbrow, but just sometimes Nova was interesting.
Yeah.
But it was also a multi-part episode thing, so I don't know. And then after that, Kojak or Columbo, probably my mom loved both, so it's probably whatever my mom would watch. And I now appreciate Columbo, but I just wasn't into it at the time. But yeah, the weekends were not. Saturday was actually pretty good, but in general, Friday through Sunday was not. Actually, it was better at this point, but it would eventually become like not a good time to watch TV.
Yeah, especially Sunday, which is like as a kid when you need good TV the most, so you can be distracted for like worrying about having to go to school on Monday.
And for me, TV taught me to multitask because I did all my homework in front of the television, and everything in front of the television. I read my comics in front of the television. It was all about divided attention.
I remember a friend of mine once came over to my house and he's like, "You're watching TV with the subtitles on, reading a comic and listening to the radio." I'm like, "Well, yeah, what else are you gonna do?"
Well, right? Yeah, no, absolutely. And you have more control over it now than you did then.
Yes, for sure.
But yeah.
This is such a weird. Oh, and there's another pilot that's not on. It's The Last Detail, a TV adaptation of the 1974 movie.
Well, that must have worked well. But, I can imagine that the thought behind it worked for MASH.
Yeah.
Why couldn't it work for The Last Detail? But almost every show that was based on a movie was terrible.
Oh, so many. MASH is maybe the only good one. And there were so many. John Hughes movies alone had 5.
Really? I'm sure there was another one that was probably good besides MASH, but I can't think of it. And I can't even think of the examples of the bad ones necessarily. It's just they all did it.
Yeah, Private Benjamin, Bustin' Loose.
And I watched Private Benjamin.
Stir Crazy.
Oh my God, Bustin' Loose, Stir Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it was always a matter, and this really reinforced the hierarchy that existed then, movies good, TV bad, because the TV versions were terrible and reminded you of how bad television is. When I've taught this course about the afterlife and narrative, I would have them watch Poltergeist from the 80s, which they found not at all scary. But I would point out to them that this is all about film's hostility to television.
Yeah.
And television is the gateway to evil, and you have to send out your television. And it's this wonderful thing where it's about how terrible the medium is, but also the war of the media.
Yeah.
At the time, movies always won. Now, of course, we've got the reverse.
Yeah. I side note had John Sayles on, and the Poltergeist connection with Sayles.
I did, but I don't remember he did a lot of ghostwriting, right?
Sort of, yeah. So Spielberg hated the fact that they made Jaws 2 without him, or didn't even ask him. So he preemptively tried to commissioned a sequel to Close Encounters. And his idea was it would be the dark flip side of the utopia of Close Encounters. So he hired Sayles to write the script because he loved Piranha. It was his favorite Jaws ripoff. So Sayles wrote this script called Dark Skies, and the premise of it was this suburban family in like a half-built cul-de-sac are terrorized by these aliens. And so he sends the script to Spielberg, and Spielberg goes, "I love this script. We're never going to make it, but here's what we're doing." He's like, "I love this idea of the suburban family being terrified in this half-truck. We're going to do that as a movie." And in the script, the family had an autistic son who befriended one of the aliens who was like a nice alien.
Oh, God, that would have been awful.
Yeah. And Spielberg was like, "I like this idea." And he'd been working on something about an imaginary friend. So he's like, "We're going to do that as a separate thing." And he paid Sayles for both movies.
Wow. So is that also the Genesis VT?
Yes. Yes.
And I wonder if somehow that led to the brother from another planet.
It very well could have. I could ask John. That would make perfect sense. There's a real hatred for it. TV was the way up or the way down. It was one or the other. And narratively, a movie is the exact opposite of a TV show. You need a finite storyline that begins and ends. And TV, you have to keep the ball in the air the whole time. So, some of the worst adaptions of movies I've seen are like Adventures in Babysitting, which is a movie set in one night and is all plot. Like, that is not going to translate.
Right. And the other way the hierarchy worked is, so movie actors could appear as guests on things like Love Boat and all that.
Yes.
But if they joined a series, that was like that was them. That was the low part of their career, and there was no coming back from it.
It was over. I will mention my favorite made for a TV adaptation is they did an adaptation of Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Oh.
It was great. I think it might even be better than the movie, and I love the movie.
I remember watching the TV series of Planet of the Apes because I was obsessed with Planet of the Apes. That was not great.
No.
But I'm fascinated by Planet of the Apes as a transmedia phenomenon. I'm going to do a rewatch soon and reread all the comics, which are actually pretty good.
Yeah, they were decent. The animated show was pretty good as well.
Well, I'm going to have to watch. I don't remember the animation. The animation must be god awful.
It's awful. It's Filmation. It's like paper dolls.
Yeah, exactly.
It's real bad. Let's see, where are we? Monday.
So Monday is that perfect balance between MTM and Norman Lear. So from 8 to 9, you have Rhoda and Phyllis. Once again, spin-offs from the best show ever, Mary Tyler Moore. And Rhoda got worse and worse over time, but it was still fun to watch because I loved Rhoda and I loved her sister. And who knew that this actress playing Brenda, this tiny part, would go on to become one of the richest actresses in the world because she's the voice of Marge Simpson. Like, I'm so happy for Julie Kavner there. I would never have expected it. And then Phyllis, which I remember enjoying, but I suspect probably was not a really great spin-off of Mary Tyler Moore, and I think only lasted kind of a season.
One season, yeah. Well, because it was that classic case of a little goes a long way with a side character.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Cloris Leachman is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. But yeah, she was not designed to maintain that. And you have the same thing happen in comics. Like, I love the character Storm in the X-Men, and but she's never been able to sustain a series on her own. I think because she works as part of an ensemble.
Yeah.
And Phyllis and Rhoda, I guess for Rhoda it worked more. Phyllis, I don't know. But I would definitely have watched those, and I loved the theme song for Phyllis, which was sort of Phyllis and Rhoda did the wonderful things with both of their openers. Where Mary Tyler Moore's famous openings, she's so happy she throws her hat in the air. Rhoda, her hat falls, and New York, this is your last chance. Phyllis, all people singing about this wonderful woman, and then ends Phyllis, Phyllis, Phyllis. It sure isn't you.
Yes.
Mary Tyler Moore is so sunny and wonderful, but then with Rhoda and Phyllis, you get the kind of 70s malaise that still haunted Mary Tyler Moore and balanced her in those original shows.
And since doing the show, I learned about Rhoda was one of the first, not the first, but was a casualty of network interference in that they pushed for her to get married that first season. And
Joe.
Then they realized it was a massive mistake because it was that will they, won't they, once they do, no one cares anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And Joe wasn't that interesting. Yeah. Have you ever watched the I think 21st century movie Mary and Rhoda TV movie? So bad. It's awful. So awful.
Awful. None of those were good. Like there was I Dream of Jeannie 30 years later, The Brady's, which was a dramatic spin-off.
I know. But then you get the Brady Bunch movie, which was
are
just
fantastic.
So
yeah.
Which I think was inspired by the neo-futurists play Real Brady Bunch, where they just read those things aloud.
Yes.
But those Brady movies were just an amazing experience.
Yes.
But I did grow up. Before hate watching, I hate watched the Brady Bunch. I never liked it, and it embarrassed me.
Of course, yeah.
But I watched it, and we all have that as a touchstone.
Yeah, I absolutely did as well. And then I would try for other shows like 8 is Enough. I couldn't even hate watch. Partridge Family. I couldn't even hate watch.
Oh well, the terrible. So when I was in junior high, in our music class, they'd have us sing as a choir, all these things, and there was this primetime cantata. That was a medley of theme songs that were on. And so there's Three's Company, which was a weird one to sing. But part of it was the theme to 8 is Enough, which I'd never paid attention to. And the music was bad enough, but the lyrics was like, there's a plate of homemade wishes on the kitchen windowsill. And 8 is enough to fill your life with love. So bad.
Oh, even like an awful melody because it was like, 'cause 8 is enough. Like it just was this. Oh.
Yes. Everything about that is awful. The only time I watched it was when my mother was paid to watch it.
It's nice to be able to literally say, I would only watch this if you paid me.
Exactly. Usually she got away with it because, everybody else in the office loved the Waltons and Little House on the Prairie, and so they could watch that, but sometimes she just got stuck.
It's not in this issue because it was 2 years later, I think, but James at 15 is...
James at 15. Losing his virginity at 16.
Yes. Well, yes. That is maybe the best young person show of the 70s that doesn't really come up often now.
No. Well, it's probably awful, right?
It's good. No, it's good. Yeah, I used to do tape trading a lot. It was one of the shows that was like a holy grail. And I rewatched the whole series, and it's actually very good. And it's even though it's adults writing for kids, it doesn't feel like that. It's not like Dobie Gillis.
Okay. Interesting.
But if I'm looking at 8 is enough and the way the kids are portrayed on that versus James at 15, it's this was contemporaneous.
No, it's true. I guess James at 15 is actually more in a direction of almost John Sayles by comparison.
Oh yeah. Slice of life, weird. Yeah, it's and do you know who played the girl who is the impetus for it becoming James at 16 in a lot of ways?
Who?
It's Terry Nunn from the band Berlin.
Oh, wow. Who knew?
She's doing, who also auditioned to be Princess Leia, weirdly.
It's like Doogie Howser growing up to be, why am I blanking on his name? But yeah.
Yeah, the world's most favorite magician. This Monday night, there's a lot of highbrow stuff. Like PBS is really, this is like their linchpin night here, where they have How We Got Here, the Chinese, and Mozart in Seattle, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. But then you have at 9, you have All in the Family, 9:30 Maude, both of which I absolutely loved. And Maude was a spin-off that totally worked with this tiny character who appeared on All in the Family just a few times as Archie's foil. But she was, it's Beatrice Arthur. She was so good, and the writing was so good. And this was stuff that I always watch. And also at this point, so I'm 10 years old, my bedtime, I had a bedtime, but my bedtime fluctuated sort of like a currency, depending on what was on that night. Like, okay, you can stay up long enough to watch Maude because it's Maude. Right. Otherwise, if you have to go to sleep at 9:30. So yeah.
If Love American Style starts and you're not in bed, it's a real problem.
There's lots of I did watch Love American Style, but that I could miss it.
Yes.
Totally. But I mean, I look at this Monday, like this is perfection 70s television almost. Like, Rhoda, Phyllis, All in the Family, Maude. I mean, if it had been Mary Tyler Moore instead of one of them, it really would have hit it all.
Yeah, and then Mary Hartman's on at 11:30, which, for people,
that's a separate conversation.
But for people who don't know about that show, because it came out in a box set on DVD, but it was never really rerun very much. It was a strip show. It was a daily 5 nights a week parody of soap operas, but not as good as soap is. Not like that. Like, not the broad. It was like mumblecore.
It really was, and it went on for 2 years. So my experience with Mary Hartman, so I was the only kid in 6th grade, I think, who loved Mary Hartman, right? And here it's on like 10 or something, but in Columbus it was on at 11:30 at night, which meant I only got to watch it on Fridays. And because that was like too much for bedtime. Sure. Right? So I would watch it on Fridays, and then for the rest of it, my mother would fill me in. And so I'd hear what's happened. Like, I didn't see the guy impaled on the Christmas tree. I had to hear about it. And then I'd watch on Fridays, and I was just still completely hooked by the sensibility. Because so Louise Lasser was absolutely wonderful as Mary Hartman, but she had this way. She was very often, it seemed like she was half dead.
Yes. Somnambulist, is that a good term?
Yeah, that basically she was so stultified by her environment that she, it starts out with her wondering about like the waxy buildup on her floor. And so I was just totally into it, and it really worked with Howard the Duck. And then when I was in high school, they were running it during the day. The box set's way too much. And then finally, about 5 years ago, I was able to torrent it. And I watched the whole thing. Hundreds of episodes, and it really held up. It was absolutely amazing, the things that they were doing there, that were exploring the medium, exploring just how miserable suburban life was. There's some stuff there where like her lover is just gaslighting her terribly. And I think we're supposed to like him, but its approach to just what was going on in the world, and to just this ongoing sense of depression and confusion was just really spoke to me. I loved it just so much.
And it's brilliant in that it is parodying the format of television that was truly women's television, that was sort of made just for women who didn't work and were home during the day as a homemaker, and like sort of exploring the misery of that with that show.
Yeah, and at the end of the first season, she's interviewed on live television on a talk show about being the average American housewife, and asked about her orgasms and things like that. And she just has a psychotic break and ends up in a mental hospital, just like Howard the Duck does a little bit later.
Yes.
And then she's in a mental hospital for a while, and you're just following that. And there were people who really, really hated it, not just because of morals and all that, but because they just couldn't couldn't fathom why anyone would make something like this.
And then Fernwood Tonight was the spinoff that weirdly was more well known for decades.
Right, and you know, R.I.P. Martin Mull very, very recently from this. There are all sorts of actors who pretty much got their start. James Cromwell was in it for a little while. Yeah. Everybody was in it, and it was truly an astonishing thing that I don't think I've seen anything really quite like it.
No, and I don't think we could. Like, I think that people aren't well versed enough in that genre to really understand it. Like, I have younger people I know who've rewatched Twin Peaks, which is one of my favorites, but that Invitation to Love parody.
Oh yeah, which is so cheesy.
They don't get it. Like, they don't understand the music. And it just seems weird. And I'm like trying to put myself in that headspace, and I'm like, I guess that would seem just like a bizarre non sequitur.
Right, and since it was filmed like a soap opera, right?
Yes.
You know, several episodes at once, and the feel of it looked like a soap opera, however the cameras worked for that. And nowadays, if you're doing something like this would be high-end television with a big budget, and then it couldn't possibly be 5 nights a week.
No, you wouldn't be doing hundreds of episodes in 2 years.
You would burning through episode after episode. I don't know how they sustain that pace, both for the actors and the writers. So no, you would not see the like of it now.
Tuesday, what do you got?
Tuesday, I started out hate watching Happy Days.
Good move.
I hated Happy Days so much. And for me, Happy Days actually represents this incursion of something very 70s, but very anti the 70s I like, going on there, because it's not the malaise. It's this 50s nostalgia. It's this direct line between the 70s and the 50s. 50s are really cool. I hated the 50s. I grew up in the shadow of the 60s. I thought my older brother was a hippie, but really he was as much a wannabe as I would have been, because doing Summer of Love, he would have been too busy having his bar mitzvah. But, still, to me, the 60s were the touchstone. The 50s was conformism and all this horrible stuff, and the show wasn't very good, but I'd probably watch it.
You kind of had to. Like, that was a touchstone cultural capital show.
Yeah.
Like, you got to be in school and know what happened, or like you're a pariah.
Yeah, you know about Fonzie, and I did see the episode where Mork appears, so I got to get to Mork and Mindy from there. But no, I really despised it. But it was one of those very 70s things that was also kind of anti-70s, and in a way, even though the aesthetic is different, I think is a direct line to what people didn't like about disco. Which is this kind of lighthearted, and it's a terrible caricature of disco, but lighthearted, contentless. Culture.
It's bland. It's so bland, so much nostalgia product generally is, because you can't have a sort of Blue Skies nostalgic thing,
right?
Being interesting.
And then the best television was the exploration of character and interiority, and here they were just these caricatures, right? Yeah. Because they were trying to be 50s, and it was a really awful show. I
mean, that's the other thing I was going to mention too about that uniqueness of the 70s is the 70s was the first decade that had nostalgia, because teenagers were pretty much first invented post-war in the 50s. Right. So you have people who are middle-aged who are looking back at their teen years and now want entertainment that's sort of nostalgic for their own youth, which we didn't have before. Like in the 50s, there weren't people being like, hey, remember the 30s, weren't they great?
Certainly not. Yeah. But in comics, I never liked reading Archie at the time. It was a similar thing.
Just seems outdated. So I'm right there with you there.
So then would become Good Times, which for me was like the least interesting Norman Lear spin-off thing, and was very much a catchphrase thing with Jimmy Walker and his dynamite and all of that. And that's where even as a kid I could see, oh, okay, like how authentic is this representation of Black experience? It seems awfully, what did I know, right? But it seemed awfully over the top and canned.
Right, which it wasn't supposed to be. Like he inadvertently became the center of the universe of that show. Right. Where if you watch the early episodes, it's much more of an ensemble. It's more about sort of the struggles. And then they kind of were just like, oh, well, people like Jimmy, let's make the show that.
Right. I mean, it was a spinoff from Maude with Estelle Rawl. And Estelle Rawl, I mean, I could just watch Estelle Rawl's face for half an hour. Just like so expressive and interesting. And she was such a good actress. And then you have the Jimmy,
John Amos was so good. Like,
oh yeah, he was great. But the show itself was just kind of,
it's broad.
That had that great theme song though.
I did a show. I did a show in Reno, Nevada, with the lineup was me, the unknown comic, Maury Langston, and Jimmy Walker.
Wow. Yeah. So how'd that go?
It was fun. I've actually done shows with Jimmy Walker twice, and he's a strange guy. He both times did this thing where he'll be like, your acts will be squeaky clean. I don't want to see and nothing, which mine pretty much is anyway, but I hate when people do that kind of thing. So, but then he goes up and proceeds to be filthy.
I find it. I every now and then he's someone I want to look up on Wikipedia because like for years I thought he was dead. Because after all this, it's nothing. He has this career, but you don't really see him.
Yeah.
I don't really understand the arc there.
He dated Ann Coulter.
No.
Yes.
Was Ann Coulter back then?
Yes. If you ever want to go down a weird internet rabbit hole, Google their names together and you will see them at It's bizarre.
Wow, it's dynamite.
Yes, it's truly dynamite. Then we have another ad for the famous Heidi Dress.
Oh, the Heidi Dress. I love that. The Heidi Dress was really something. And how do they refer? Do they call it the famous Heidi Dress?
It says sale. Don't pay $30. The famous Heidi Dress now only $12.99. Save now. Our exclusive quote unquote Heidi Dress is now yours.
Not for swingers. I'm guessing.
No. This is weirdly. Yeah, you would think this would be the thing that they would kind of advertise that way, but apparently not.
And I wonder who's buying their clothes out of TV Guide.
I don't know. Yeah, I wonder if anyone ever did. I will usually look up like collector plates and that sort of thing on eBay just to see how like the one that cost $119 in payments is now $4. But I can't imagine these exist out in the wild at all.
And I'm trying to remember to get a sense of what $13 was like back then. It was probably a fair amount of money.
Probably like $30, I'm guessing.
I mean, comics were a quarter.
And then and they're what, $5 now?
Yeah, I mean, that's not the best indicator, but $13 was, you had to think about, I think.
Oh, yeah. That was like I have to have a reason to buy this.
Yeah. Which
I have an event.
Yeah.
Then there's a weird thing on PBS that night that has a title that is not the description of the show is not lived up to what the title is, but it's called Pin to See the Peep Show.
So I don't have it in front of me. What is the description?
It is a courtroom drama. Fills the concluding episode as Julia and Leonard stand trial for murder. I'm like, what?
Wow, Pin to See the Peep Show. That is, and it's with what looks like a no-star cast.
No, I'm like, maybe it's English. Crown Counsel. Yeah, it might be an English.
It's Channel 2 PBS.
Yeah.
Okay. Pin to See. I can't even parse that sentence.
No, well, my wife is Rachel. Is that a phrase? Pin to See the Peep Show. My English wife has not heard that phrase.
I'm Googling it as we speak. It's a 1973 TV series based on the 1934 book by F. Tennyson Jesse, which is a fictionalized account of the notorious case of Edith Thompson and Frederick Bywaters in 1922. Very notorious. Yeah. Huh.
A 1930s phrase. That sounds about right. Okay.
Yes. Okay. I wonder what a peep show was back in the 1930s.
Yeah, I don't think it was what we think it is. Yeah, so that was exciting. And it's on at the same time as MASH.
Yes, it's obviously choose MASH.
Yes.
Right? I mean, and this is a really good episode of MASH with Letters from Home.
Yes.
MASH did these very special episodes really, really well and also had interesting narrative experiments. The funny thing is, when I've watched MASH recently, also with All in the Family, it doesn't hold up as well as I would expect it to because it's just so earnest.
Yeah. You think they're being ironic almost because we've trained ourselves to like expect that. Yeah.
So I mean, I still love this show, but I think it's a harder rewatch than you would think because we all loved it so much.
Yeah, it's funny, the shows I would think that stand up for a rewatch from the 70s that don't are usually the ones that are the most critically praised, like literally those two. And then shows like Bob Newhart Show, Barney Miller especially, and Mary Tyler Moore, like I could watch those anytime, rewatch, they hold up, they're pretty much bulletproof.
Yeah, what's interesting is these other shows, what people liked them for was they were topical, contemporary, dealing with issues, and it doesn't hold up well. Whereas Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart, and Barney Miller, I mean, yes, they're of their times, but they're kind of timeless. They're not dependent as much on the Times.
Right.
You just watch them.
And weirdly, Barney Miller is sort of more progressive now than now is.
Yeah, it is amazing. And I remember going from Barney Miller to Hill Street Blues and trying to figure like how I can like them both. Like a cop show that never left the office, except in the first few episodes where you're at Barney's home. Really, really kind of amazing. And I was reading. I was so happy to be reading this book on one of the more recent books on gay television. I can't remember which one, talking about the portrayal of the gay characters. And I still remember. Every time I hear the word frivolous,
Yes,
you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So there is a guy who wants to defect from the Soviet Union, while Marty, the gay shoplifter, is in the cage there, and Barney is asking him, "Well, we want to know why you want to leave, because it's one thing if it's serious, but we don't want it to be something frivolous." He says, "What means frivolous?" He says, if it's for a girl. He says, "Oh, I am not frivolous. I am homosexual."
Yes.
And then Marty starts singing "My Country 'Tis of Thee" or something like that.
And Marty was such a great character. Yeah, I think it's the Hi Honey I'm Homo book, I think.
Yes, Hi Honey I'm Homo.
Yes.
That was yes, of course. Great title, great book. And I was just so happy to see that, and also a discussion of Beverly LaSalle, what then called female impersonator on the Family.
Yes.
And I rewatched that while reading. It's like, well, that really held up really, really well.
The 2-part quarantine episode of Barney Miller where Luger, who's my favorite character, when he realizes that they're gay, and the way that he realizes it, he's like trying to make small talk, and he goes, "That's a nice sweater you got there." And the guy goes, "Oh, thanks, it's Italian." And then he's like, "What?" And like he can't fathom. It's just so, it's great.
Whereas Barney just is kind of relaxed about it, and Wojo's homophobic.
Yeah.
And you have Fish, one of my favorites.
He's so good. Yeah, and that's a show too that had recastings, new cast members come in, and almost got better, arguably.
Yeah. And Jack Sue dies, and Fish gets a spinoff, which was, but you get, what is his name playing Dietrich?
Oh, yeah, Dietrich. He's so good. Steve Lattisberg comes in. Yeah. He's so good. Dietrich's probably my favorite character on that show.
Dietrich's great. Dietrich with Ron Glass.
Yeah. So good. Where are we, Wednesday?
Oh, no, we haven't gotten to 9:30, which is I'd be One Day at a Time, which I enjoyed. I loved the theme song.
Yes.
The theme song was like one of the best theme songs of the 70s. I think it still really holds up really well. But it was okay.
Everyone loved Valerie Bertinelli. That was the thing.
My father loved Valerie Bertinelli. Everyone loved Valerie Bertinelli. And Mackenzie Phillips, it was sort of like, it's really sad to watch this all happen.
Yeah.
Did you see that she was on she was in Orange is the New Black?
Yes.
That was quite amazing to see. But yeah, it was. But the whole Schneider stuff, it was okay. It was okay. It was watchable.
Yeah, it's broad. It's like the pitch of it is pretty progressive, but the execution's relatively broad.
Yeah, and I remember as a kid not being able to understand why it was such a big deal that the guy she's dating is like 7 or 8 years younger. Like, who cares?
Who cares? They look the same to me. What's the problem?
Yeah. So that was all right.
And then Bilko's on at the same time, which I 100% would have watched over One Day at a Time.
Oh, I would not have. I wasn't a Bill, but yeah, that would definitely have been one day at a time.
Oh, God, I love Phil Silvers.
Yeah, and One Day at a Time was one of those many shows that had to have like premise creep on it. Like you lose people, so what do you do when you get rid of the teenagers? So okay, let's adopt a little girl here, just like they did in the Family. Cousin Oliver or whatever. It's not quite jumping the shark, but it's a desperate move. Yeah. To just kind of keep things going.
Introduce a kid, introduce a younger sibling who we've never heard of before who moves in with the main character.
Yeah. Exactly.
Very bad. So where are we? To Wednesday,
Bionic Woman.
Yeah.
So as a kid, I have my $6 Million Man lunchbox, and I really love $6 Million Man. But when Bionic Woman appeared, that was just she was great. And there ended up being this 4-part thing where Jamie dies, and I remember I was crying when Jamie dies, and Lee Majors is singing this horrible song, "Jamie, Sweet Jamie," so awful. But in a way, this was sort of like how sometimes it's sort of funny in comics and adventure things when you just make the character female, which seems like a very basic thing to do, you get a better emotional range. So her stories were more interesting than Lee Major's stories were. Plus, she fought a Sasquatch and fembots.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a big Bionic Woman fan.
Well, it was because I think we saw so few, like, it was sort of television hero coming out of the sort of Western tradition, which was real, like, square jaw. There's not really any women even around. So it's very literally black and white. And as a kid who grew up loving comics, we didn't get a lot of comic-like shows.
Yes. And I would consume them desperately and be disappointed. I was really into the Man from Atlantis, which must have been god awful.
It's real bad.
Patrick Duffy's swim and all that. But I really liked Victor Bono as the villain. But I kept wanting, like, that's when I was like, when I'd really understand the difference in the media, like, I really wanted to serialize. I really wanted to develop, and it just refused to develop. It's going to be episode of the week.
Yeah.
That was like the least of the troubles with Man with Atlantis, but it was what bothered me.
Yeah, well, it's the Incredible Hulk thing where I'm like, especially at the time when they were making the TV show and the comics, Incredible Hulk is like Defenders, we're getting cosmic, it's amazing. And literally, it's like he's fighting a bulldozer.
Yeah, and it's a reset every damn week.
Yes.
It's like, I'm gonna wander in again. And so from a storytelling point of view, it was just dull. It was so dull.
Have you ever, if people are playing TV Guidance Counselor Bingo at home, I'm going to mention the Hulk Out list. Have you ever seen Ken Johnson's Hulk Out list?
No, what is
so
this?
Ken Johnson, who created the Incredible Hulk for television, also did V and some other stuff later. Someone compiled a very matter-of-fact list of everything that caused Bruce Banner to Hulk out in every episode of the TV series, and it's just like matter-of-fact. It's so funny because it will literally be like Boulder didn't have change for the phone, angry about a meal, thrown off a building, falls down a well. Like, it's just this amazing. It's like the best piece of like found art I've ever seen.
It is so great. Oh, there was one sequence of Incredible Hulk which I really liked, which had Marriott Hartley, who was she and Bill Bixby, and it starred in the series of TV commercials that everybody loved. I can't remember what it was for, but do you remember this?
It was like they were like coffee commercials or something, I think.
Yeah, but they were like news anchors or something.
Yeah.
They were adorable.
Oh, it was Goodnight Beantown they also did later.
Oh, yeah, after that. But she plays this woman who is a research scientist, I think, from his past, and they fall in love, but she's dying of some disease, and he's trying to cure her. So I think they move in together, and then she dies. But it was this great moment of, one, there's a really good actress here, and two, so there's character development. There's something that's going to last. And then, no, of course, she dies. He's going to go off on the road again, and we're going to have that sad Hulk music.
Have you ever revisited Misfits of Science?
No, I have not. How does that hold?
I got the German DVDs. It is pretty close to X-Men, and weirdly, it's a lot like the Mike Allred X Factor with like their sort of celebrities and there's a corporate sponsorship. Like, that show could have been something really like 30 years ahead of its time. There's some interesting things worth watching in there.
On another tangent, have you seen the YouTube video of imagining Wes Anderson's X-Men?
Yes.
Yeah. It's perfect.
I'd watch it.
Totally
he could do a great adaptation of Excalibur, I think.
Yes, he could. I'll watch whatever he does. Absolutely.
Is that everything on Wednesday?
So Wednesday is 9:00. The only thing I could find, I somehow remembered this British show called No Honestly, because I remembered the theme song.
Okay.
All I remember is the theme song, and I just know that I watched a little of it.
I'd never even heard of this. So it looks like it seems to be it is a comedy.
Yeah, so around in the 70s, occasionally on PBS they would show these British comedies. Obviously Fawlty Towers.
Yeah, are being served.
Classic, but there'd be other things like To the Manor Born and stuff like that. Watch, like, oh, these are kind of cute. I don't think No Honestly was that, but somehow I ended up watching it.
Well, I mean,
but then 9:30 you've got Monty Python.
Yes, which was so amazing because this is 10 years old at this point. No, not maybe close to it. And just the story of that. Coming to the U.S., they pitched it to every single station. No one would air it, and the first one that did was a Texas PBS station.
A Texas PBS,
Texas,
really?
Yes. And if you're familiar with the band The Butthole Surfers,
oh sure,
Gibby Haynes' father was like a kids show host in Texas, and I believe he was the one that greenlit them airing Monty Python.
Wow. So for me, it was I think in when I was 10, my second oldest brother took me and my third oldest brother to see Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and it was like a revelation.
Yeah.
And so then we'd watch it all the time. And Monty Python is one of those things, if we go back to the commercials and the common knowledge thing, it was another common knowledge thing that was both a bond and really just obnoxious. Like you'd get together and you'd sort of act out and quote these Monty Python sketches and really enjoy it, but also feel like, ooh, I am such a nerd. Or these other people,
yes,
they're such nerds. They're quoting Monty Python all the time. There's something about quoting Monty Python all the time that was fun, but really puts you in this category, this sort of category of social contagion that you kind of didn't want to be stuck in.
It was comedy nerds. It was the first time we really started getting comedy nerds. It was like...
Yeah, but the fake British accents and... we were always quoting the Knights of St.
Of course.
And the position, but it got tedious. Not the show itself, but the way we used it.
Because it sort of organically grew in that it sort of, because it was not underground, because it aired sporadically on different PBS stations, people kind of discovered it in a weird way that it became one of those shows where it's like, if you've seen this thing, we're friends kind of thing here.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And in 6th grade for Hanukkah, I got Monty Python's Big Red Book, which was blue.
Yes.
And that was great. Also, it had a lot of nudity, which I thought was fantastic.
It's PBS, they can show it.
Yeah. The book and the show. But I had a book with naked women in it, basically.
Yes.
It was given to me by my parents when I was 11.
It would have made more sense for your bar mitzvah.
Well, pretty much, yes. It was still around. So that was great.
This is a show called Blue Night, a crime drama, which I'd never heard of, but the description just caught my eye because it says, Bumper's Beat is plagued by crooks wielding unusual weapons. An ice pick armed thief and a couple of aimless ex-cons equipped with a 20mm anti-tank gun, and Bumper's played by George Kennedy.
Yeah, this is a description that almost sounds like ChatGPT came up with it. It makes no sense at all.
No.
But now I kind of want to watch it.
Yeah, I feel like I need to dig that up because I was like, wait, am I reading this right?
Yeah. Oh my God,
Jeez.
yes.
And then Hawk with Burt Reynolds, which was his short-lived TV show.
Yes,
Thursday, what do you got?
Thursday. So Thursday I ended up watching Welcome Back, Kotter, kind of grudgingly, which is it's okay.
Talk about not holding up. Ooh.
Yeah, definitely not holding up. And I'm thinking, okay, so this is 76, so this would be before John Travolta left because it would be before Saturday Night Theater, Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah, it would have been the year he did Carrie.
Oh, he was in Carrie, right. But that wouldn't stop him. That was not his breakout role. For me, I loved the notes signed by Epstein's mother.
Yep.
And I loved Arnold Horshack. Always telling you that Horshack means the cattle are dying. But otherwise, and the theme song.
Yeah. But then talk about a show whose original conceit was completely overshadowed by the execution, where it was like, that show was not about Gabe Kaplan.
No. Well, then also when John Travolta became big, it just that kind of really shifted the balance, because I think he stayed on the show a little while after Saturday Night Fever, so he was just this teen heartthrob.
Yeah, and then Grease, that 1-2 punch.
Oh, right.
Speaking of nostalgia for the 50s.
Exactly. I didn't even watch Grease at the time because I was so offended by the idea of the nostalgia.
Yeah. Not a fan either for that very reason.
Yeah. But then 8:30 you get Barney Miller, which, as we've already seen, is it's like Mary Tyler Moore, one of the best shows ever made, and I think really, really does hold up so well.
This particular episode is a Wojo specific one, and it's Wojo intimidates a purse snatcher who resists arrest, so he's examined by a psychiatrist who recommends his suspension from duty. This is a great episode.
I don't remember this one.
This is a great one. It's because Wojo didn't always get his own episodes. When he did, they really were pretty great.
Yeah, because he was designed to be kind of dumb.
Yeah.
But not totally. So
no, and his heart was in the right place, and he's sort of right wing. He was a Vietnam vet, and they sort of had the father son thing with him and Barney. The sort of Woody, and Sam Malone kind of Cheers dynamic.
Yeah, and then those dynamics always had to shift. Like when Jack Sue was on, it was totally different. And the dynamic between Fish and Ron Glass's character Harris, was replaced by the Harris Dietrich dynamic, which was just one of the
they were living together for the whole last few seasons. Dietrich and Harris. Oh, I would watch that show.
And I remember learning, like, I'd never heard of Goethe before Dietrich's going to a Goethe festival.
Yes.
What is Goethe? Yeah.
Oh, that's just a killer show. And that's the show I always recommend to people who like, I want to write comedy. I'm like, that's a writer's show. Like the cast is great, but it's literally a play. It's, it's a one room bottle episode pretty much every episode.
It's true. So, which means it has to live or die on the writing and the acting.
Yeah. Yeah. The plots are irrelevant, which is crazy for a cop show.
The plots they're basically, they're kind of like the premise for improv.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's, they're not relying on an ice pick wielding anti-tank gun guy.
No, certainly not.
And where is that everything on Thursday?
Well, 9:00 I'd watch Hawaii Five-0, I guess.
My grandfather was an angry man from Norway, and the only things he watched was People's Court and his Hawaii program, which was Hawaii
His
5-0.
Hawaii program.
I'm watching the Hawaii program.
Bookham Dano was great, and it had a great theme song.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That was when they discovered we should always have a show set in Hawaii so that we can live there as the producers.
Yeah, it took them a while to follow up on that, though, until Magnum. Right.
They were like, we got to get back there. Come on, greenlight a show. They did have some pilots set there. There was one called the Forever People, the Lost People, that was kind of like Lost.
Huh, well, yeah.
But it didn't go. But they were like, we just want an excuse to have a production company in Hawaii.
Why not?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I guess we can. Friday, final night of the week. What are you going with?
Friday, well, that gets rough. So Friday, 8:00, Sanford and Son, which I never exactly loved, but Elizabeth, I'm coming to join ya is sort of a classic line. But I never quite understood how I was supposed to react to Sanford and Son, to these characters, especially, well, Sanford, I guess his brother, right?
Yeah, his son and his brother, yeah.
And then there was all the stuff with like their neighbor or sister, the woman who's so ugly. It was every time she comes, "Oh, you're so ugly."
On Esther, right? Is it LaWanda Page? Yeah.
And it's kind of I didn't really like that.
It's a mean show.
It is a very mean show, but not this kind of fun mean like an Arrested Development or Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Sure.
This was just sort of mean.
Yeah, like you were like, he really hates this woman.
Yeah, he really hates this woman. And the humor about it, like, how many different times can you call her ugly? It was, yeah.
It was, yeah. I could see. Yeah, that show did make me uncomfortable.
Yeah. But I watched it.
Sure.
Because 8:30 is tough. I mean, I don't think I'd watch the Apollo. There's something called The Practice, which is not the 90s show. What was The Practice?
This is a comedy. To spare Jules any unnecessary worry, Molly, played by Dina Dietrich, who I don't know, consults David for her abdominal pains and learns that she may have a malignancy. This is a comedy.
Oh, that's fun.
Danny Thomas, John Biner. So yeah, this did not go long. That sounds bad.
Yeah, but my choices are The Practice, Apollo, Horse Racing, or Wall Street Week. This is what Friday was. This is what the weekend was like. It's like, if you really kind of have to go out.
Yeah.
Because there's just no reason to stay home.
I'd probably watch the Sam Fuller Shock Treatment movie.
Oh, right. That starts at 8.
Yeah.
Yes.
That would have been less disturbing than The Practice, where they're having a comedy about a malignancy.
Mary Hartman did that really, really well. So when the woman who was going to be a country music singer.
Oh yes, yes.
Loretta thinks she's having a baby, but it turns out she's got a fibroid tumor.
Yes.
And he's saying to her, "Honey, it's not a baby. It's a fibroid tumor." But it's a fibroid tumor. I was gonna call it Merle Haggard Jr. And that was great stuff.
That would work now.
It would work.
And Rockford Files, which is a show I've learned to really love later.
Yeah. That to me was something I'd watched. Like, my parents had on, and I kind of liked it, could take or leave, but had a fantastic theme song.
Yeah, Mike Post.
Yeah. So that. But again, like, very non-serialized, and I guess I didn't really like the crime detective stuff all that much. Now that I think,
have you ever gotten into that later, or just like kind of not your thing?
Well, what would be an example of? I mean, I watched The Wire,
Sure,
but like the detective stuff, probably not so much. I mean, I don't like the genre of mysteries. Just don't really do it for me.
Oh, interesting.
So it has to be something else. I had to, when I was doing my second book on Russian contemporary popular culture, mysteries is the dominant genre, and I had to read them, and that was kind of interesting because they were different. But otherwise, no, it's just not something I gravitate towards.
Before we wrap up, just because there's very few people I could talk about this with the nexus of superheroes and Russian pop culture, but there was a movie I saw ages ago, and it's like an aquatic superhero. It's
is this the amphibian?
Yes.
From like the 50s or 60s? Yeah. He wasn't quite a superhero. He was more like a mutant. That was a big deal, in part because it was one of the few science fiction-y movies out there. So there are people who really love it. So going back to the thing with the mysteries, mysteries were my way into mass culture because I didn't like I love science fiction. I just didn't like Russian science fiction. I just didn't press the right buttons. So I could learn to like a new genre for me, which is the Russian mysteries, which were very, very different.
Interesting.
But I was sort of alienated by the science fiction.
Although I liked the V. The V? Is that the thing that it's the Gogol story?
Oh, V, based on a Gogol short story. That is wonderful. You're talking about the recent movie, right?
There was a recent one, but then the original one I like it's from the 60s, I think.
Yes, no, it was great. It's a wonderful. So there's great fantasy stories. The science fiction ones never really did it for me so much.
Yeah. I think I've never seen that original one that Roger Corman bought with the very phallic and vaginal aliens that was recut to be like Battle of the Planets or something like that.
Oh, right. What was that?
War of the Planets, maybe?
Yeah. They did. Yeah, that was impressive.
Yeah.
I can't remember which movie. That was a movie that was actually kind of good, I think, in the original.
Let's check it out.
Yeah, but I'm drawing a blank, and I really should.
Quite all right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad we finally got to do it. And as I said, I love the Marvel book, and just fascinating topic, and this has been great.
Oh, this is so much fun. I really appreciate you having me on.
There you go. That's Elliot. What a smart, fun, interesting guy. Again, go to ElliotBorenstein.net. I put links in the show description here. You can find me on social media at Kenneth W. Reed, R-E-I-D, or at TV Guidance, or shoot me an email at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or ken@reed.com, and I can send you any links or anything you may need from him. If you have as little as $1 a month, you can become a patron of the show. Go to patreon.com/TV Guidance Counselor, or just Google Patreon TV Guidance Counselor. It'll come up. And if you have $5 or more a month, you would have gotten PDFs of the TV guide that we discussed this week, and you could play along at home, which is a lot of fun. Or, you don't have to either. Email me. Let me know what you think of the show. Let me know if there are guests you'd like to have on the show. Oh, I also have Buy Me a Coffee. I know some people asked if I could put that up there. If you want to throw some cash towards the show, you can do that as well. Anyway, I'll be here next week for a brand new episode, and I hope you will too for that brand new episode of TV Guidance Counselor.
I could watch Three's Company and have no problem, except that it was Three's Company.